All right. Welcome to Falcon Forward, our podcast for Falcon West. Excited for this episode. Mike Tanghe, our president's on with me. Mike, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Peter. Just back from a 3-day lacrosse tournament in Palm Springs area, and lots of sun, lots of lacrosse, but it was a fun weekend.
All right. I was talking to my friend Russ. His son plays lacrosse. I think you've met Russ before. You guys might have been at the same tournament. It's one of there's probably tournaments all over right now, but he was traveling home and I think a bigger tournament that you're probably at, my guess is, at least
I
coming up in
think
the
it
season.
was 1,100 teams that were
Yeah.
playing across 80
Yeah.
fields.
Yeah.
It's a massive, yeah, it was quite fun. Actually saw a lot of people that I knew that were going to be there. Ran into a bunch of people I didn't know were going to be there, and
Yeah.
it was a good tournament.
Good times. My son had his third basketball game of his entire life, and so we can actually keep track of it like that still. And he hasn't made any shots yet, but he's getting better. He's getting there. So it's fun to watch him grow up and go through that. But
That's awesome.
anyways, moving on to the topic at hand. So today we wanted to talk about why we feel that insurance is the best career in industry, and maybe a topic that not everyone would think of, but for us, I think about it all the time. I tell people how great this is. I mean, I fell into it much later in life. I think I got my license when I was 31 or 32. I didn't join Falcon West until 3 years ago, which doesn't, that's amazing how fast time goes. But
Yeah, I was going to
to
say, wow.
I know already, but to look back on everything, I thought a good starting point would be to ask you how you got into insurance, and we could just go from there.
Absolutely. So I got into insurance, like I'd say most people, by accident, in that I was graduating college. I had a couple of ideas of where I wanted to work, two opportunities working with family friends who were successful entrepreneurs that I looked up to, and I had actually worked for both of them in my summer months during college, and they had both offered positions to work on a full-time basis. I knew them, I admired them, but I had an opportunity to meet with a company, and they sold insurance. That's all I knew, and I didn't know anything about it, and I wasn't overly excited about it. I think few 22-year-olds who don't already know someone in the industry would say that they're excited by it. But I went on this interview with fairly low expectations and came away from maybe an hour and a half interview thinking, wow, like I'm really excited about learning more about this opportunity.
Hmm.
I'd really give credit to the person who was interviewing me. So my first manager, Mark Mattingly, and actually kind of a fun story
Hmm.
tying back to lacrosse. One of my coworkers that I hadn't seen for 30 years, or just under 30 years, but we found out that our sons are both on the same club lacrosse team at a tournament probably 3 weeks back. And
Okay.
this Friday, that person who had stayed in touch with our manager and and Darren Bayless are all having lunch together at the old spot we used to go to back in the late 90s. So
Right on.
kind of a fun story. But anyways, you asked the question, how did I get involved? Or how did I get into insurance? Was I went on this interview not knowing anything at all about insurance, but very much impressed with the person who was interviewing me. So he had started in the same position that I was interviewing for 6 years before I had, and he'd done well and been promoted. And what he was describing was this business where you get to know industry very well, you get to know the businesses very well, and then
Hmm.
you get to consult with them on how do they transfer risk and limit their risk of their company so that if something bad does happen, that effectively their company can live another day. And as I learned more about that, I was very intrigued with that. Sounded like a pretty cool thing to be able to do, to ask a business owner all questions about their business, how they got started, how they operate, and kind of do a deep dive in these companies.
Hmm.
And then they in turn were looking to you to tell them what they needed to do to make sure that if they had a fire or if they had a lawsuit or if they had, any of a number of things that could happen, that their business that they've put their heart and soul into could effectively live another day. So that's how I got started in insurance back in 1996.
All right. That's a while ago, but and I'm sure my question that kind of comes off that is like, have things changed in the industry over the last 20, 30 years? I mean, it feels largely the same. Like you'd mentioned, I think when we were and I were talking about like just like the the generation that's kind of, I guess retiring out of insurance, right? And it seems like there's not a ton of like these young new entrants into the space unless it's like an insure tech, and then that's a whole nother conversation. But like, what has changed in the industry if there was like two or three things that you could think of?
So the biggest thing I would say that hasn't changed is it is 100% a relationship-based business. And your means of reaching clients or reaching prospects has certainly changed over the years. But at the end of the day, what makes them select you versus staying with their current person or picking someone else as their broker, that has not changed at all. So what I guess I enjoy about that is you get to learn new tools, but they help you perfect a craft that if you're successful, you already know how to do. And so to me, again, very gratifying in that it's challenging. There's new ways to communicate with our clients or reach our prospects, but all those tools that you're learning are all designed to get you to that same point, which is how do I communicate to this person, business owner or otherwise, what's important to them? How do they understand the risk? And then how do they best mitigate that risk, either through their own changes in operations or transferring that financial risk to an insurance company?
Like when you're thinking about insurance carriers, right? I mean, have there been insurance carriers that have come and gone in that time frame, or I mean, is it something that has been fairly consistent?
So I would say insurance lags a bit on its ability to change, or pace of change is probably the more accurate way to describe that. But certainly there's been M&A over the years. So great examples of that would be companies like Chubb, which, started out as Ace. Ace bought Fireman's Fund, Ace bought, and then actually Ace, the smaller company, bought Chubb, the larger company, adopted the Chubb name. So companies like the St. Paul companies that became St. Paul Travelers, that then just became Travelers. So there, while there is a fair amount of N&A in the actual carrier space, generally insurance companies, if you think about it, they like to look at data of risk. They like actuarial information, and they like to be very predictable and stable in how, and that's what makes them good investments, that they're not, they're not very, they don't like volatility, I guess would be a good way to describe it. So while there certainly has been M&A, there has been some new entrants. Like for example, this is something we talk about quite often with our clients, is like cyber insurance is a relatively new product in the
Mhm.
insurance industry, meaning it's, probably only been around for about 15 years, and it's changed quite a bit in that time frame. Which in the insurance world, 15 years is kind of nothing. If you look at that, there's a lot of companies that would be newer entrants to selling cyber insurance. And what we tell clients is, let's look and find a stable organization, because at the end of the day, you're buying a promise for someone to pay, and you don't want someone who may not be able to pay when that day comes. So certainly buying that lends itself to companies that have been around a long time, companies that will be there for a long time as well.
I've always enjoyed, this is like the weirdest, nerdiest thing, but I've always followed insurance companies like stock on the stock market. My favorite, if I could like pick one of I don't know who has a favorite insurance company, but Markel is one of my favorites as far as like just watching how they invest. And, Tom Gaynor's been with the company, I think, since 96 or 97, just tremendous, brilliant capital allocator. But every time that I have a chance to hear him speak on a podcast or, read their investment letters, it's pretty incredible because they're $200 a share up to, 2,400 a share now, I think, and just watching how they grow. But his whole entire premise for how Markel grows is we're always careful with underwriting, we're careful with the money, and we make sure that we can pay the claims. Like that's simple business for him, right? And pretty
Yeah.
cool how it's just grown and continued. And Warren Buffett with Geico, same kind of concept. Going back to Chubb for a second. So back in my past career, I had one of my great clients, Marty and Nancy, and to this day, Marty will still call me and ask questions about cars, and I told him like, Marty, I don't really have a pulse on that market anymore, but I'm happy to help you look around. But every time he would come in, he would just talk about how much he loved Chubb as an insurance company. He was an attorney in New York for 50 years, super smart guy, but he was always talking about how much he loved Chubb. And I just thought that was such an interesting thing too, is like they really can build like a loyal following of clients, right? If they treat him right. And, even to a point where, you could tell him like, we'll save you money. He's still going to stay with Chubb. So
Yeah.
very fascinating. But so real quick, going into like, and we'll go through some topics here and talk
Yeah.
about specifically why insurance is a career, maybe some things that people hadn't thought about, or maybe they're listening to this for the first time, asking if maybe they should start a career. But if I kind of go back in my life, so, I helped my family kind of run a family business for 14 years. And I remember in 2000, so I graduated college in 2013, and my wife and I got married right around the same time, and we went to dinner one night, and a friend of mine from high school was there with her husband. And so we said, hey, like, hadn't seen them in probably 5 or 6 years. And I said, what are you doing these days? Because he was a Starbucks barista, and he's like, dude, I'm doing insurance now. He's like, I'm an insurance broker. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. Never thought about anything else, but insurance for
Yeah.
some reason was interesting. So he's like, you got to come talk to my boss. So 2014, drove up to Temecula, sat down. They started going through and like telling me like how they sell insurance. And there's like 10 sales guys in a room, and they had training sessions, all this stuff. He's like, yeah, this is what you can do if you want to grow a business and have your own thing. Well, obviously I didn't want to leave the family business. I loved working with my dad too much, but it was like my first glimpse into it.
Okay.
So
Nice.
fast forward into a couple years ago, and my dad decides to sell the business. I stick around for a year, but in the meantime, I'm like, what am I going to do? Like, how can I go start my own business of sorts, or be in a different position and grow a company and have some autonomy with my kids and all that? And then you and I got introduced. I think three people were like, you got to talk to Mike Tanghe. Like, and I'm like, okay, Mike's apparently the guy, just not sure if insurance is the career. So you and I talked for a bit, and then, ends up, kind of falling into what I feel like falling into another career in insurance. But it's such an interesting thing. Like, it really is a fun thing. So I wanted to kind of touch on your list and go through
Yeah.
that. I know you kind of put together a sort of a formalized idea, but let's talk through that and maybe have some thoughts, both of us.
Yeah. Sounds fantastic. I'd say for me, first off, like what was that, the why insurance? Or if I had to say, and there's a number of reasons that, and I think it would vary for each person. But for me, it's really that flexibility where you can control your work environment. And I'll give some examples of that. I started, like I said at the beginning of this show, in insurance. And I worked for 3 years with a great insurance company based out of Minnesota, working in Southern California as a sales rep for them. But when I was in my mid-20s, I left the insurance industry to go work in
Mm.
the tech industry. So I'd done
Okay.
insurance, I'd done it for 3 years, had success, enjoyed it, but it was kind of that is the grass greener?
Mhm.
And so and this is also in the late 90s, which a little early for yourself, but it was the whole Y2K, and there was a lot of money being
Yeah.
flowing into the tech industry, and that was the cool industry to work in. Myself and actually a lot of my coworkers all left to go work in the tech industry, and I worked for four
Hmm.
years with some companies, and it was great, kind of in the way of how an internship can be great when you can figure out, hey, this is something that I don't really want to do for the rest of my life. Tech has a lot of interesting things about it, but when I was about to get married and we had talked at, some point, hopefully starting our own family, it was then kind of, all right, what's going to be my career? At this point, I was 27 years old, 28 years old. And my thought was, I'm going to get back into insurance. And it kind of made the same list that I made in preparation for the show, but that flexibility, meaning that I can control my schedule. So it didn't require me, like, if I was in the restaurant business, to get there at 6 a.m. to open up the restaurant, or if someone didn't show up for work and all of a sudden I had to go fill in for them.
Hmm.
It allows, effectively, if you have internet access, you can perform your job.
Yeah.
And so that means you can have that control of your schedule. So for me, it was very important to have the ability to go to my kids, volunteer at their schools, coach their teams. It doesn't mean that I wasn't working hard, but instead of being in like a 9 to 5 type position, it would be I would get the work done whenever the work needed to get done. And
Hmm.
sometimes that meant working late at night when the kids were sleeping. Sometimes it meant working over the weekends, but meaning that I knew what I had to get done, and it was up to me when I was going to get that done. And I didn't necessarily have to be physically in a location to do that. So having that level of flexibility where I could kind of prioritize, okay, what's the most important thing to do at that time, just gave me kind of, hey, this is something that will check that box for me of having that bit of flexibility.
Yeah.
How about yourself? How would you say when we were sitting
Man,
back, meeting in a coffee shop, chatting 3+ years ago?
oh, man, well, I do remember how cold it was the first time I met you.
That's true.
Dude, I was wearing
I
probably
forgot
like
about
the
that.
thinnest jacket, and then you're like I don't know, man, you're much more warm blooded or something. But when I think what I was looking for was, it's difficult. Like I lived and worked through like a year of working for a corporation in another industry, right? And what I realized really quickly was that the autonomy that I had where I could come into work every day and have ownership of it and like providing other people with a great place to work too was another part of it for me was like, we had employees that had kids and had, okay, this is going on or that's going on. But people liked coming to work, right? And then when it got switched over to a corporate environment, it just wasn't the same, right? I mean, there was obviously much more strict processes. So, like, my thought sitting down was like, I want to get into a position where, I can do the hard work. I can come up with the ideas. I can try them. I can fail on my own terms, right? That was sort of my goal with anything. And insurance, I also like the idea too. There's no inventory, right? Like we
Yep.
have, it's a product, but I don't have to worry about, walking a line of cars and making sure that, my audit's not going to fail every month and stuff like that. And not that that was ever really a concern, but inventory, like not having inventory was nice, right?
Yeah.
So there's those are small things. The other part that really drew me to it is there's this consistent need to learn. Like I'm a learner by nature. I'm a teacher as well. And so anytime that I can learn something, it's like it's a great day, right? I mean, I know everyone's like learn one thing a day and I'm like if I don't learn 10 new things and figure out how they work together, like I'm not doing my job. So insurance kind of causes, it creates that. Even talking to Bill Leversey, one of our brokers, he was getting to like a political risk policy a couple days ago. We're talking about it, and I was like, that's something I never really thought about or heard about. And so he was sharing some stuff with me, and like I'm like, now I got to go learn it. So sure enough, there it is, 11 o'clock at night, and I'm like still looking at my computer screen, like learning about it. And it's like, why is it? Do I need to know it right away? No, but will I need it someday? There's a good possibility. So that need to always learn. And then the other part of it too was this whole idea of like, we're going to go start this oil and gas vertical was so intriguing to me because
Yeah.
the ability to be like, we're going to try to go from 0 to, 100 and we're going to go as fast as we can and we're going to build this thing up. And it's like, I didn't know anything about the industry. I didn't know I didn't know the language, none of it. And so really like putting myself to task on just like involving myself and immersing myself into it was critical. And like, now I'm like, I'm going to NAPE next month and we're going to Oklahoma City. And I'm like, I get to meet all these cool people. Like the coolest group of people I've ever met in my life, it's just great. So there's just so much to it. But really, I think the ability to like win or lose by your own hard work is what was really the factor that drove me to it. So
Yeah.
that's like my number one thing. And everyone's gonna have a different thing too. I mean, I've talked to other brokers that are like, it was the only job available that I could get. I mean, I've heard that, and then it like they end up being just monster producers or account managers like that are just they like doing things and they're just so detail oriented. Like my wife, she like thrives on that, right? She's very much like, hey, what can I take off your plate? Is there anything I can do to like make your day easier? Can I go through that? Do you want me to review that policy with you? Like there's stuff that she'll do, and I'm like, but you're like not even in insurance. It's like, well, I know how to like match numbers up, and I'm very, so it's just like everyone's skill set that you can really have any skill set in the world and apply it to this industry. You just have to find out where you fit in. So
Yep. 100% on that. And you hit on a very important topic, I think, is that what are your interests? Like what motivates you or what is an area you want to learn? And guess what? That interest or that area or that industry requires insurance. And so, you can quickly become the insurance expert in that space and then make a living from it. While at the same time getting that intellectual, stimulation on it.
yeah,
So a kind of a funny example along those same lines was I mentioned my first job was with Federated Insurance right out of college. And while I was interviewing for jobs, there's a company here in San Diego. We'll keep them nameless for now. It's not critical of them at all, but I applied to be a warehouse driver for this company because it was a cool company. They had a bunch of locations. They sold a cool product. And I was like, oh, well, I'm interviewing for a career position, I'll get a warehouse job. And so I applied for the job, and they came back and didn't hire me. And the reason they said was I didn't have a California driver's license at the time. So otherwise, I think I probably would have qualified for the job. But my point with this is I went through this 6-month training program when I was hired by a few months later with this insurance company. And part of their training program is you service accounts that are existing clients of that insurance agency. And one of the accounts that I was servicing was this company that I had, 7 months before applied for a warehouse
Yeah.
job at, and they declined me. And I
Yeah.
remember like sitting in a meeting, I'm 23 years old, I'm dressed up nice, but like with the founder of the company, their board of directors, and I'm running through an insurance presentation. And I didn't tell them at the time, although in retrospect it would have been kind of funny. I was well trained, and I had prepared for the meeting, and I had a good presentation, and they'd kind of been a little bit of an orphan account at our agency or at the company. So they had some stuff that needed to get cleaned up on their policies. So I went through my presentation, went through my recommendations, and, again, very, very successful business. And they're all, agreeing with it and thanking me and telling me good job. And I so badly wanted to be like, 7 months ago, you guys didn't hire me in your warehouse. I'm glad we closed this several $100,000 deal today.
Yeah. It's funny,
But the point
man.
with all that is that learning aspect of it, that you get to sit across the table from some very successful business owners who have fascinating stories and how they started their company or what got them into it. And you get to know those folks very, very well. It's so, to me, extremely gratifying when you can sit across the table from them, you can give them good recommendations, and they're appreciative of what you're doing and appreciative of that knowledge. To me, again, what an exciting industry where you can do something like that and then have that really, I have clients now that I've worked with for over 20 years, and you see good times, you see them, unfortunately go through some bad times, you see them raise families, you see, all these things, you see life happen for these folks. And you really, again, to me, can you put a value on knowing someone for 20 plus years and working with them that closely? It's pretty cool.
That is really cool. You get to, like, I don't know, when you're trusted at that level, it's like it's gratifying on a level that you can't even you can't express that. I mean, you really can't. There's no way around it. So that's such a cool thing. It's a
Yeah.
great thought. I'm not 20 years in, but when I am, I hope to look back and be like, man, got some cool people that I've got to work with, and even now, I mean, still, even at this juncture, I can't even explain, like, the stuff I've learned from our clients alone, and like, it's incredible. So just good people, and very fortunate to do what we do. So
Absolutely.
on that note, I think we're almost 25 minutes in, so we could wrap it up here. But any parting thoughts as we move on to the week ahead?
I'd say if you're a person who's evaluating the insurance industry as a career or just evaluating any career, we talked a lot with people who are either career changers or, recent college grads, or like in our academy program, these professional athletes that are thinking of their next act. You look at why insurance, and to me, it's the most stable industry that is out there. So industries like real estate, what does a real estate person do? Constantly chasing deals versus what we do. It's an annual contract that you get paid on year after year after year. You look at something like the tech industry, which I worked in for a period of time. It is such a volatile, like kind of binge and purge industry on it. And, depending on where you are in that cycle, which is totally out of your control,
Yeah.
you're either going to do okay or you're going to really, really struggle. And again, insurance just does not have that. You look at something like the medical industry or pharmaceutical industry. You don't have that level of freedom as far as controlling your schedule. If they're doing a surgery and it's on a weekend, like, you have to be in the OR
Hmm.
for that surgery. You look at something like going actually into the medical field as a doctor, that's going to require years of schooling and a significant amount of likely debt before you even get to that kind of earning power in the industry. You look at something like group health, where their business, it's insurance, but they probably do 80% of their business in the last 6 weeks of the year, which makes for a very stressful fourth quarter versus our business is spread out over the course of a year. So there's
Yeah.
so many reasons that, kind of check boxes And obviously, you have to make sure that it's the right reasons for you, and those things are important to you. But I really don't know of any other industry that allows you to develop the type of relationships that we get to develop with our clients and coworkers, that level of financial freedom. Like you mentioned, inventory. There's no product that you have to have, there's no margin that we're selling on.
Yeah.
Some of these things that other industries you have to compete with, we don't have that.
Mhm.
So really you have a path of people who've done it before. Okay, I know that if I work hard, I can have that same level of success because others have done it. You have that freedom to what's important to you, what industries are important to you or of interest to you. And then you have that flexibility to how am I going to reach prospects in that area. Feel very strongly that insurance is really the best career. Just grateful that it's given me the opportunities it has, and grateful that I get to work with so many great folks who share that same interest.
About 100%. Well, as we move to close, I just want to say thank you guys for listening. Thank you to our Falcon West listeners, our team. If you guys might be the only ones listening to this, and if you made it all the way through, let me know. But really appreciate you guys showing up and being part of the team with us. So, anyways, have a great week, and we'll see you again next week as well.